Hello and welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Andy. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion about ranks and insignia during the Civil War by talking about the Union Navy. Before I get going, I'd like to say thank you to our patrons, the coffee grinders, whose financial contribution keeps Civil War Digital Digest on the air. If you aren't a patron already, consider going over to our Patreon page and joining up. We'd appreciate your contribution. During the Civil War, the Navy made tremendous growth from a small regional navy of about 60 ships to one of the world's largest navies with over 600 ships. This growth during the war caused massive organizational changes to the Navy. The Navy had to expand its officer ranks as it expanded its officer corps. It had to deal with some long-standing issues, such as the fact that there were no flag officers, no admirals in the Navy, and the Navy finally had to expand them in order to achieve parity with their Army counterparts in combined operations. Furthermore, the Navy was expanding with technological advances. This is the era of steam, and the Navy finally had to better integrate its engineering officers and other specialty officers with their line officers. All of these changes took place during the war and resulted in 3 distinct periods of rank and insignia for its officers. The pre-war ranks and insignia of the Civil War Navy began in 1852 and would be in service up through the summer of 1862. Beginning that summer, the Navy expanded its ranks and changed its insignia and kept those insignia in service through 1864. Finally, in 1864, they made one final adjustment to their insignia and ranks, and that would be the structure that remained in place for the remainder of the war. During the years immediately prior to the Civil War, the Navy had begun to make progress on updating its insignia, its ranks, and its uniforms from what they had been prior to the Civil War during the Age of Sail to adapt for the Industrial Revolution. Part of these changes with the 1852 uniform regulations was to introduce underdress items for officers. This introduced things like a kepi instead of a cocked hat, but also for insignia, shoulder straps instead of epaulets for an underdress for officers. Prior to the Civil War, Navy officer ranks hadn't changed much since the Age of Sail. In the early American Republic, there was a fear of having an established military, and because of this, Congress had never authorized admirals for the U.S. Navy. Consequently, the highest rank was a captain, which is equivalent to an Army colonel. Now, the Navy did have flag officers, also known as commodores, during this period, but that was a temporary rank for a captain who commanded a squadron or a special group of ships with other captains under him. It wasn't a rank unto itself. Below this was the rank of commander. Below the commander was the rank of lieutenant, which was the same as a captain in the Army. Now, there was some special notice of lieutenants who commanded ships, and during the Civil War, that would evolve into its own rank, but we'll talk about that later. Finally, we have the junior officers in the Navy. We have the rank of master, which was the same as first lieutenant in the Army, and then we had past midshipmen, which were midshipmen who had completed their course of instruction at the Naval Academy in Annapolis and had passed their examination for promotion, but for whom there were no billets available yet, so they served as junior officers waiting for their time to promote to the rank of master. For those of you that are watching and thinking, wait a minute, I thought midshipmen were a rank that were on ships during this period. During the Age of Sail, that was true, where junior officers would join a ship and that would be their course of instruction at sea. Beginning in the 1840s, the Navy centralized their training of junior officers by establishing the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Now, all midshipmen went to the Naval Academy to complete a course of instruction prior to heading out to the fleet for service as junior officers. This was to provide for more consistent instruction across the fleet and also to introduce midshipmen to more advanced technical and engineering concepts as they became more important during the steam age. Insignia before the Civil War was done either by a combination of sleeve braid and buttons or by shoulder straps. Captain insignia was done by 3 3/4-inch pieces of braid on the sleeve as well as 3 brass buttons on the cuff. For shoulder straps, it was simply an eagle inside the shoulder strap. Commander rank was indicated by 2 3/4-inch pieces of braid as well as the 3 brass buttons on the cuff, and then 2 fouled crossed anchors in his shoulder strap. Lieutenants were indicated by 1 3/4-inch piece of braid with the 3 buttons on the cuff, as well as a single fouled anchor on his shoulder strap. Masters had no sleeve braid, however they still had the 3 brass buttons on their cuff. Their shoulder strap was blank inside though. Past midshipmen also had no sleeve braid, and they had 3 large brass buttons as well. However, their shoulder strap was a solid gold shoulder strap. This insignia that we see going into the Civil War is very antiquated and a carryover from the Age of Sail, and just wouldn't be up to the rigors of the Civil War, and quickly would be surpassed by the needs for a much expanded officer corps. During 1861 and early 1862, the Navy began to implement a series of temporary changes to its rank in order to deal with the growth of its officer corps. The first of these was the introduction of flag rank as a semi-permanent rank in 1861. This was to begin to give parity for naval officers with Army officers in combined operations. Prior to this point, a Navy Commodore would have just been the equivalent of a colonel, and it's very hard to talk to a Major General as a peer when you are outranked by 2 ranks. In 1861, President Lincoln decreed by executive order that flag officers would rank the same as Major Generals. And so the Navy adopted a new rank insignia for flag officers, which was the captain's eagle in the center with 2 stars on the outside of the shoulder strap. 1862 saw a wholesale change in ranks within the Navy and its insignia. It began with the introduction of the rank of Rear Admiral, as well as the rank of Commodore, to rank respectively as a Major General or Brigadier General with their Army counterparts. This also saw the introduction of the rank of Lieutenant Commander. As we alluded to earlier, there were lieutenants who commanded ships who were given special status, but their rank was substantially still a lieutenant. The Navy recognized that it needed an intermediate rank between lieutenant and commander, and consequently created the rank of Lieutenant Commander on July 31st, 1862. The Navy also dropped the rank past midshipman at this point and adopted the earliest commission rank of the Navy, the one that we're familiar with today, Ensign. So let's talk about the rank insignia for officers from 1862 to 1864. The highest rank was Rear Admiral, whose rank was indicated by 3 alternating pairs of sleeve braid of 3/4 and 1/4 inch braid. His shoulder strap was indicated by a fouled anchor in the center with silver stars on the outside. The next rank down was Commodore, which was the equivalent of Brigadier General in the Army. His rank was indicated by 5 bands of alternating 3/4 and 1/4 inch braid, and his shoulder strap was a fouled anchor with a single silver star. The captain rank actually didn't change from the 1852 regulations. His sleeve braid was still 3 3/4 inch pieces of braid, and his shoulder strap still had the eagle in the center of it. Next on rank was the commander, the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel in the Army. His sleeve braid was alternating 2 3/4 inch pieces of braid with a 1/4 inch piece of braid in the center of it. On his shoulder strap, he had 2 silver oak leaves with a fouled anchor in the center. Next down was the new rank of Lieutenant Commander, which equated to Major in the Army. His sleeve braid was 2 3/4 inch pieces of braid, and on his shoulder strap he had 2 gold oak leaves with a fouled anchor in the center. Next was Lieutenant, which was indicated by 1 3/4 and 1 1/4 inch piece of sleeve braid, and on his shoulder he had the 2 silver bars as well as the fouled anchor. Next on the list was Master, the equivalent of First Lieutenant in the Army. He had 1 3/4 inch piece of sleeve braid, and on his shoulder he had 1 silver bar as well as the fouled anchor in the center of his strap. And finally, with the new rank of Ensign, he had 1 1/4 inch piece of braid on his sleeve, and then his shoulder strap was bare except for the fouled anchor in the center. With the adoption of this rank and insignia structure, the Navy largely adopted what we're familiar with today. The sleeve braid combinations are different, and the insignia slightly changed over time, but the structure is exactly the same as we see in the Navy today. And generally, an officer from today would recognize these ranks and insignia in the Civil War Navy during the majority of their service. In March of 1863, the Navy decided to formalize some of the changes to their staff corps within the officer corps. These are officers who served alongside their line brethren, sometimes at sea, sometimes not, like surgeons, engineers, paymasters, secretaries, professors, and naval constructors. These officer ranks were formalized, and they wore the same insignia as their line brethren, with the exception that line officers wore a star above their sleeve braid, and these staff officers did not. Medical officers additionally wore a special insignia on their cover to designate them as doctors. All of these changes took place during the 1862 to 1864 uniform and insignia that we've talked about already. In 1864, the Navy made one final set of changes to its insignia that it would use during the war. Most importantly, it began with the addition of the rank of Vice Admiral. It was the equivalent of Lieutenant General in the Army. Admiral Farragut was the first officer appointed to this position and gave him parity with General Grant ashore. The Navy also made small changes to the shoulder straps to make them more closely mirror the Army shoulder straps. The eagle on the captain's rank became the same eagle from the Army colonel's rank instead of a slightly more naval eagle that had been used prior to that time. Additionally, the follow the anchor insignia in the center of the rank strap was changed to simplify it. The biggest change during this era is the change of the sleeve braid. Instead of the alternating series of wide and narrow sleeve braid that had been used prior to this point, the Navy adopted 1/4 inch sleeve braid across the entire service. The sleeve braid system was much simpler now, with ensigns having 1/4 inch sleeve braid and every subsequent rank above that having an additional 1/4 inch piece of sleeve braid. So that's the rank insignia for officers through all three periods of the Civil War era for the Union Navy. We have talked about buttons during this era, and I did want to say that the buttons that you see in use during the Civil War are actually the same style button that we see in use to this very day. It's interesting, both the Navy and the Marine Corps have kept the same style of button in service with their officer corps since their establishment in 1794. So this has been our look at rank and insignia for officers in the U.S. Navy during the Civil War. As you can see, it's a little confusing, it's a little turbulent, but the Navy ended up at the end of the war with this large world Navy, and it set the stage with the same rank and insignia structure that we largely see carried on into our modern Navy. I hope you learned something today, got a better appreciation of the Navy, its role as it became the organization we see today. For Civil War Digital Digest, I'm Andy. We'll catch you next time.